phase 1 of Genesis, which we're entitling The Laws of Nature. And this revolves around the fundamental approach we use to build our planet and is the literal foundation for everything else we're going to talk about in this talk today. Now, it centers on data-driven, physically based rules that we aim to realistically emulate nature and its incredible diversity. Before we dive in a bit deeper, let's just recap on some of the things we already have on our planet. So here you can see our lovely atmosphere and our cloud rendering, which can provide some spectacular views. We have our on-the-fly terrain generation, which is no loading screens in our game, which we're very proud of. And then we have our scattering system that can populate these planets with many different diverse biomes. And we've been setting quality benchmarks for each of these biomes as we come across them one by one.
But what we have isn't perfect. This scene on Microtech, it looks great, but it's not getting the same density that you'd expect from a real pine forest. That's one of the things we want to solve. The other, if I take you to the other side of Microtech, you'd be excused if you thought we'd just turned around and looked at a different part of the forest. Why is that? Well, this is because currently our artists create slices of biomes in great number, and then they distribute them across the planet using humidity and temperature properties. Each slice looks great in isolation, as you've seen, as you've explored. But this is not the solution to give us varied and natural biomes across an entire planet. Additionally, just using humidity and temperature limits us to only 2 degrees of variation. And that's not enough for the sorts of planets and worlds that we want to create and for you to explore.
So how are we going to scale up our planet generation? Well, as I said before, we're going to start with physically based rules that drive everything. We want nothing to feel random on these planets. We want no limitations on the number of biomes. We want infinite biomes that are continuously changing across the planets. And we want extreme density, and we want to maintain or exceed all of the quality levels we've set with our existing biomes. And most importantly, we want it to be scalable so that we can really scale up to the level of content that the designers are expecting. And from your perspective, we want you to be able to truly explore and find unique playing opportunities everywhere on our planets. So to start this, we're going to need more data. So if we see here some of our existing data sets on our planets, we have temperature, which we define locally and globally, and humidity, and that's it for now. With Genesis, we add many other data sets, such as the geology type, the soil type, and then we also go for things like the soil depth and the quality and the nutrients, and many other properties all drive this complex data set that we use to build rule sets on that each individual asset can describe how it should work with them.
Okay.
We're going to put something together and show you some demos today using some of the assets that you've already know and love in the PU.
Bin ich mal gespannt. Das kann cool werden für Leute, die exploren möchten. Das ist geil. Mehr Variation der Planeten. Dann macht Exploren auch Spaß, Alter.
The number one challenge with planets in our game is scale. In no other context do you need a planet to look great from first-person perspective when you're stood among the trees. You need it to look great when you're in a spaceship at a quantum marker miles away. And everywhere in between. There are no loading screens, you see everything. We cannot afford for it to look bad in any other scenarios. So, let's start from a ground perspective. Demo number 1, let's have a look.
Steine floaten immer noch, aber okay. Dichter Nadelwald, okay. Kein Mischwald. Bodenbedecker. Gras. Da gar nicht hin. Ja. Ja, das sieht schon nicht schlecht aus. Das ist crazy. Das ist einfach riesig, ne? Das ist ein Furz gegen, Alter. Das wird jetzt automatisch generiert, oder wie habe ich das richtig verstanden? Ja, oder?
So, let's talk about first what's underneath it all. The ground! So, in our previous terrain shader, we just switched between different ground textures depending on climate and didn't really consider the unique properties of each type. Now, the terrain shader is based around 4 layers. We always first consider bedrock at the bottom of it all. Then, where appropriate, we add layers of soil of different types. We then add debris where appropriate, whether it be pine needles, dead leaves, etc. And then when it gets cold, we add snow. Each of these layers has unique shading properties and unique transitions between them. Because we do this all in one shader, we're able to achieve that as well as being performant. We can also use things like water saturation to darken and tint the soil and other properties to make it look more realistic. But that's not what filled most of the screen in that demo. That's the vegetation. Like what Ali said, we want to emulate the laws of nature. So in Genesis, we have rule sets for every asset that tells it how to respond to our rich data, whether it be soil type, water availability, temperature, geology, or whatever. We assess the viability and the vitality of each asset and compare them to decide what is likely to spawn in a natural environment. This automatically creates the cohesive environments that you saw in that clip. Not handcrafted anymore. No one has told those ferns and those pines to be like that. They each want to be like that. And that's what we're doing, multiple assets coming together to create a unique microbiome. What about trees then? Same thing. They have a larger requirement for space. They have a larger requirement for nutrients. That's how you see the distribution, and it's how it all works. Let's meet the flora that came together to make that forest, and have a look at some of their properties. Now, just to note, they are all going to look quite similar because we've already seen them in the same place, so they must be similar. So, building blocks, like grass and common grass, medium amounts of sunlight. We had ferns, see it's a much lower requirement for sunlight. We had sage forming our undergrowth.
Bereiche, wo sie spawnen dürfen, ja.
Multiple variations of pines. Diversity is driven by competition. Everything has ideal conditions, which affects its competitiveness. We also have additional control over this in the form of dominance, which allows us to make one asset more competitive and more dominant than another, which is just what we see in nature. Everything is constantly fighting for resources and, of course, light. Because we spawn these assets in a hierarchy, it's easy to propagate shade data down over the distribution of the assets so that we can control ones that prefer or reject shade. Often, like these ferns, they can spawn in light, but they are outcompeted in those scenarios most of the time. So you will see a rogue fern, or a place where there's no seeds for a specific asset, you might start to get this coming in. Let's take a look from a larger perspective again.
Ein paar Steine dazwischen, unten den Soil Floor, die Steine. Ändert sich das Gras auch ein bisschen farblich. Okay. Sieht man zumindest die Diversity, die er angesprochen hat, die Unterschiede. Ob das denn auch nun wirklich so funktioniert und wann das kommt, ist wieder eine ganz andere Frage. Aber es sieht schon mal gut aus. Sieht besser aus. Auch die Bergspitzen da, der Übergang sieht gut aus. Ja, wirkt echter. Ist nur eine kleine Facette, die vielen Leuten vielleicht nicht auffallen wird, aber das ist ein Unterschied.
So, to take you through some of the things we saw in that clip, let's talk about rocks first. So anyone that's done a lot of ground driving and ground vehicles might have seen that our rocks sometimes feel a little bit randomly scattered and it can be quite an obstacle sometimes. So in this clip, you saw that the rocks are no longer randomly scattered and they're now placed based on physically based rule sets. And this logical grouping is achieved via erosion simulations, which we run offline to build localized data maps. And they describe the size of the aggregate and rocks and the density and where they should naturally form. And that means we get things like these natural clusters of boulders at the forest edge underneath the cliffside. And on that note, you might have noticed that the cliffs...
Wo die halt liegen können, in echt auch.
We also see things like the natural clumping of vegetation caused by seed dispersal. This is controlled per species, so we can get better emulation of their unique growth patterns and create a much more realistic environment. And we also calculate the slope aspect, which is the exposure to vegetation to solar radiation and other environmental factors. And this allows us different species to flourish in different conditions, as we can see on different sides of this valley. Then over larger scale, we calculate the age and vitality of each tree individually to drive exactly how high they should be, but also the color of their leaves.
What?
Now, this isn't the only thing that will drive the color of the leaves. We're going to introduce the concept of seasons to the game. And this will mean our planets will evolve.
Es gibt
through
verschiedene
the year,
Altersstufen
and we'll be
in.
able to shed leaves from trees and have the grass wither in winter.
So as you're starting to see, all these rules, all this data, it's all coming together to create what we call truly emergent biomes. Let's have one more look at how this varies over a much
Jahreszeiten, ja,
larger scale.
crazy, ne? Ja, das kommt vielleicht noch. Wahrscheinlich werden die Grundplaneten dann vorgepinselt einfach. Oder es gibt da Presets für, wie man das machen kann, und dann wird das dann halt darauf dann der Generator drauf abgesetzt. Dass es immer noch einen gibt, der vielleicht so die Shapes und die Surface-Bereiche zeichnet mit einem groben Pinsel, was wohin kommt, Berge und sowas. Und dann wird das generiert. Ich denke, so wird das erstmal laufen. Weil diese Surfaces müssen ja vorgegeben sein, das stimmt, ja. Also, gibt es wahrscheinlich auch irgendwie so einen Generator für, aber das sieht dann wild aus. Muss auch immer eine geologische oder eine nachvollziehbare Berglandschaft haben. Kannst dich einfach wild irgendwo hinsetzen. Geht auch bei Monden, aber nicht auf so Planeten, wo Fauna, Vegetation und Topografie sein soll. Ja, was man sagen kann, es sieht einfach geil aus. Es sieht einfach geil aus. Das können die einfach, ne? Das können die einfach. Sieht unfassbar gut aus. Verdammt, ey.
Just like in real life. Oh, thank you. Just like in real life, our areas should vary, even by traveling a few kilometers. If you get in a helicopter and fly over the Alps, it all looks a bit snowy, but when you look closer, it's constantly changing. And we're now able to accurately represent that with our changing data. Another very important factor to mention is the distant look. In this screenshot, you don't see a single tree, and yet the terrain is still green. We previously did that with artist-made lookup tables that told the planet what color to be at what position. But that wasn't going to work with all our new data and our far more complex spawning. Now we have a systemic solution. The planet shader is able to intelligently evaluate what's going to spawn there using the same rule sets that cause the assets to spawn there when you get there. That means we can sample the sort of color that is going to project onto the orbital view and use it. We get a far better accuracy from the result. Together, by creating rules and authoring data that works, we create a continuously varying planet that sets the scene for the incredible exploration gameplay I know you guys are going to have. But how have we done this without compromising on the
Da hätte ich auch Bock drauf.
So yeah, with all this new data sets and these physically based spawning rules, you're probably wondering, how is this going to handle in your CPU? We don't want to melt anyone's CPU, so we designed all of this tech to work much more efficiently than before, and now it can run on many cores. This allows it to be run perfectly well on both the CPU and the GPU. So we've redesigned our framework so that we can run it at both and swap between them freely. Now, the benefit of this is we can do things like, first off, move the terrain system to the GPU, and we've now done that to get some incredible performance improvements, but we then also cache the results in some what we call a virtual terrain texture. I'll just give you a quick demo of this now. This is now vastly faster than the previous system, but it also allows us to generate the terrain in much higher resolution, which means all the popping you can see on the mountains as we're approaching, all of that should be completely eliminated on the right-hand side of the screen.
With the extra headroom we've gained
Okay.
by making our terrain system more efficient, we've been able to introduce some
Krass.
improvements, including high resolution ground textures, proper blending between surface types, and of course better tiling. If you're familiar with any of our planets, we've taken off all the assets so you can see the issue, and now how it looks, you don't see those lines going at all.
Ein bisschen mehr Tiefe, ne? Ah ja, die Randomness. Die Pattern drehen sich. Ja. Ist nicht direkt ersichtlich, aber es fällt auf.
With the terrain data cached on the GPU, like Ali said, we can perform the scattering there too, which is significantly faster. All those algorithms that we've used to generate
Significantly?
those can run there without being more expensive on your CPU. And it also means the results are directly there on the GPU. We can render straight from them. That allows us to have dramatically more density in our new system. We can render objects directly without having to go via the CPU every frame. We also cull at different levels of granularity, with bigger groups in the distance and individual assets up close.
Ja, so sieht es aktuell aus.
Sort of density you can expect
Aufploppen und wegploppen der Bäume, ja, okay.
and in a second we'll flip over
Sieht
to
einfach
what
aus,
you
als ob das
expect.
einer mit einem Pinsel so Photoshop-Pinselmäßig die Bäume hingemalt hat. Jetzt zeigt mal das Neue. Wenn das so funktioniert, Alter.
These are the groups that we create of those trees and of the terrain, and as we get closer, we shrink them so we're more intelligently rendering what we need without having to assess each tree individually, all the way down to the ground.
Holy shit. Du brauchst mit dem größten Schiff gar nicht versuchen zu landen, oder? Die Bäume knicken nach
So
oben
to
dann.
recap some of the things you've seen here in phase one, we had data-driven rules based on physically based data, generating emergent biomes that continuously vary across our planets to get infinite possibilities. And we've achieved this with much greater density than before and much faster rendering. And we also achieved seamless transitions from ground to space with zero popping. So, now that we've
Wenn sie das wirklich hinkriegen, ohne aufploppen, das wäre schon krass. Wenn sie das wirklich schaffen, dass man nicht mal dieses Ploppen und diese Bergecken umändern nicht mehr sieht, krass. Das ist schon krass.